Hello YouTubers, this is Matador. Today we are looking at the most well-known MMO in video game history, and that is World of Warcraft. So as we go through this list, we are going to rank every expansion release of World of Warcraft over the last 15 plus years since 2004. And we'd like to give a shout out of an honorable mention to Warcraft 3, which is really the origins of WoW in general. Let's get started. Number 9, Cataclysm. I'm throwing down the gauntlet here and saying Cata is by far the worst expansion that we experienced. This had the unfortunate circumstance of following Wrath, which was the culmination of that Warcraft 3 storyline. And so Cataclysm was when Blizzard was developing new narratives solely for WoW, and they didn't have a lot to work with. They brought Deathwing out of retirement, who was a character in the Warcraft series, but didn't really have a lot going on. They also made a huge tactical error in updating the old zones. Even the quirkiness and the kind of ridiculous rewards you got from those vanilla quests were nostalgic for people. And when it was all removed, and all of it was removed, it's not that they just changed a couple quests, they changed literally everything. It removed a lot of the sort of nostalgic joy of the vanilla World of Warcraft experience, and it created some serious time sink issues as we moved forward. Not to mention the new zones that Cata added weren't that spectacular. You had one unifying story for each zone, and you had to unlock instanced areas of those zones, which made it really hard to play with someone else who was on a different part of that quest line in the same zone. It also had the worst last tier of all time. It just reused artwork from the End of Time dungeon, and it reused artwork from the Dragon Citadel or Tower, whatever it's called, and it lasted forever. I mean, it was like over a year that this horrible Deathwing fight and his entire tier was on WoW, and this caused the subscriptions to absolutely tank. Number 8, Warlords of Draenor. The reason I make it second worst is because the raid content was actually really good in Warlords. I had a great time raiding, especially Hellfire. Tanking through Hellfire Citadel was legit awesome. I had a good time with it. There was also some decent daily stuff going on in Tanan Forest or Tanan Jungle, and some other stuff to do, but unfortunately the storyline narratively was just nonsensical. It was this bizarre time travel plot where everyone they had previously killed in the narrative just sort of came back from the dead, and then we immediately killed them all in the first patch. It was kind of ridiculous. Like, you brought Ner'zhul, like the original Lich King, back just to die in a 5-man dungeon as like the first dungeon you encounter. It made no sense, and prior to launch of the expansion they began dropping things. Like, they had made an entire city or a couple cities that were just totally going to be unused, and then they dropped raid tiers halfway through and decided to scrap it and move on to the next expansion because they just realized it was terrible. This also introduced pseudo-player housing, which had been asked for ad nausea for the entire 10-year cycle that WoW had been in existence at this time, but they gave us garrisons, which was really hit or miss. You were just kind of stuck, isolated in your garrison, and you couldn't really get out to do anything. And mission tables, ugh. It did have revamped character models, though, which was really an awesome visual graphical upgrade. Number 7, Battle for Azeroth, or Bugs for Azeroth, if you will. There were bugs everywhere in this game. I mean, you couldn't do anything in the entirety of BFA without encountering some sort of bug that would just break the game for you, or break the quest that you're doing, or you'd tippy-toe one step outside of the daily quest zone and lose all your progress. I mean, it was just outrageous. It did introduce new activities at the end game called war games, but it wasn't fun. And island expeditions were a revised version of scenarios which were originally introduced in MOP, but they were much worse. The only thing that was really good about BFA was allied races, and even those weren't good either. Allied races, some of them were cool and popular, like more elves. Everyone loves elves and trolls. You want to play a diaper gnome that has mechanical arms and legs? No, nobody does. And you had these bizarre unlock, reputation, time-gated activities necessary to even get the allied races. Also, BFA suffered from severely broken power systems, especially when we got to the later tiers, and it was the void touched gear, or whatever it's called, that had special abilities on it, which was kind of randomly given to you, and some of them were just absolutely game breaking. I mean, you could attack something and trigger just a bajillion damage if you had the right void touched stats on your gear. So it became just kind of random and broken, but that's not to say it wasn't fun, which is why I put it above Draenor and Kata, because he still had a good time with BFA. It just seemed like it was in constant beta, and they never really got it together. Number 6, Mists of Pandaria. This expansion was controversial online at first because of the Pandaren. So the Pandaren were introduced as kind of a joke race on April Fools by Blizzard, but people sort of liked it, so they incorporated them into Warcraft 3, and then in this expansion they incorporated them as a major player in WoW lore, and people were kind of on edge about it, weirdly, but whatever. This expansion was actually pretty good. It streamlined raid content. MOP's raid structures and the bosses were all quality experiences, and it stayed that way from 2012 on. Every boss encounter and every raid had this same sort of quality. It did become a bit homogenized, but you always knew you were going to have a good time. It also had scenarios, which I miss dearly. The 3-person scenarios meant you could go in with a group of all DPS if you wanted, or all healers, or all tanks. It didn't matter. You just went with your friends and you had a short narrative 3-man pseudo dungeon of instanced content, and I loved these. I used to spam these so much because they were so quick. You never had to wait in the LFG queue, and they were always entertaining. This also introduced the pet battle system, which I'm not a fan of turn-based anything, but people love this Pokemon style pet battle system. They're obsessed with pet collecting and battling them. Mist suffered from having a weak storyline that changed halfway through. The story was just, hey, let's go check out Pandaria. And then all of a sudden it became about Garrosh and the Horde, and we were back on the other continent of Kalimdor. It was very confusing. It didn't make sense why a expansion about Pandaria would wrap up the whole Pandarian story at the halfway point. Number 5, The Burning Crusade. The first expansion for World of Warcraft took the original vanilla WoW and it improved it to the point where every class was finally viable. I mean, the patches in vanilla helped to improve class viability, but TBC really hit the nail on the head by making all classes and really all specs able to be brought to raid encounters and be successful. They might not be optimal, but they were all viable. TBC also reduced raid size from 40 man to 25 man and even 10 for Karazhan. There was also ridiculous attunement requirements for TVC. I mean, you had to go through just an insane map of different dungeons and then heroics and then raids and then back and forth again just to be able to access Karazhan or any of the other raid content. And you had to do this on every toon you wanted to play, so it was certainly not alt-friendly whatsoever. This also introduced daily quests, not really how we know them now, but in a simple daily quests on the Isle of Keldanos. And it brought about flying, which was actually very welcome by the player base, but the developers have grown to hate this and view it as the worst decision they ever made to implement flying, because every expansion, it's hard to make content that you can't just fly over top of everything without forcing people on the ground. And of course, the shining star of Burning Crusade was arenas. In order to be successful, you had to be the best or just be broken as stun burst combo classes. But it did require some skill, a lot more than just standard Battlegrounds did. People look back very fondly on TVC. Number 4, Shadowlands. The most recent expansion, Shadowlands demonstrated an interesting story progression arc across the beginning of the expansion. Players were able to choose a specific covenant and then play out that covenant's storyline over the weeks that followed. Shadowlands also expands on optional in-game content in that they have a zone that's not required, but you can go and you can explore it and you can do daily quests there and you can kill rares as much as you want. This is something that sort of originated with the Timeless Isle back in Mist of Pandaria, and they expanded it with a solo dungeon / scenario experience of Torghast, the Tower of the Damned, which granted was kind of broken because it, just like the prior expansion BFA, you would collect a random assortment of abilities that you really had no power over which ones you got. And some of them were OP and some of them would ensure that you were unsuccessful and wasted your time. Shadowlands also brought a lot of character customization, which is something that players had been asking the entire history, 15 plus years of World of Warcraft, to let us be able to put tattoos on our dwarves and things like that. And Shadowlands fixed the broken power systems of BFA, sort of, by reworking those same power systems in different formats and different strings and ways of unlocking them, which was largely effective, although redundant if you had played the previous expansion. The lore here was a little weak though. Again, WoW's going into territory of unexplored narrative that never really comes together fully. Number 3, Wrath of the Lich King. This is a lot of people's favorite expansion, and the reason for that is largely narrative, because this is the ultimate conclusion to the Warcraft story, right? So we went Warcraft 1, 2, and 3, the RTS games. 3 presented all these amazing characters that you really enjoyed playing with or playing against, and that narrative concluded with the final encounter with Arthas the Lich King. This expansion had a lot of quality zones to it. The entire Northrend was awesome to play through. Everyone had a good time leveling, and there was a variety of zones you could go to, and you didn't have to do them all, which made alt leveling a lot more fun. Also, Wintergrass was an entire PvP zone, which was something totally awesome and totally unique. It was this bizarre kind of experiment that largely was a little broken, but a lot of fun. Wrath also introduced vehicles, which to me is a negative. You use vehicles in Wintergrasp and other places in quests, and I didn't like this because it meant that you weren't playing your character anymore, you were playing a vehicle. Also, the terrible Ice Crown tournament was a horrible daily zone area with jousting, which is probably the worst vehicle combat that has ever been in this game. The Argent Tournament is easily the worst raid in WoW's history. However, it is bookended by some of the most amazing raids in WoW's history, which is Ulduar, which is probably the top raid ever, and ICC, Ice Crown Citadel, which is one of the top raids. These were so expansive, and they had so many just amazing boss encounters that everyone loved to replay, and people still go back and go through them today to try to get mounts or gear or just re-experience it. Number 2, Vanilla World of Warcraft, also classic World of Warcraft. So the original WoW, released in 2004, was re-released to much hype and much success in 2019, and there's a reason for that. Because this was a humongously open world, massive multiplayer online video game that took what was originally the MMO genre of EverQuest and RuneScape, and it expanded it with this hugely popular Warcraft narrative and all kinds of systems of PvP and PvE content and roleplay that was just unseen before or since in the entire genre. I mean, this changed the entire landscape of MMOs and video gaming forever. People who had never played video games before in their life came out of nowhere to play the original WoW. This introduced, of course, the 40-man raid content that we know and love from Classic. But that's not to say it was all positive, because there was some disastrous classes / specs that got altered throughout the patch cycles as Blizzard tried desperately to improve what they initially launched with, which is why Classic eventually only contained the final patch, where it was the most complete version of Vanilla. There was also an insane PvP grind that broke people's real lives. There were divorces and people hospitalized because they were grinding PvP for 80 to 100 hours a week. And that's what it was like. It was just crazy experience that was super addictive and super fun, and you established relationships. And this is just, the best representation of WoW as an MMO entity is Vanilla / Classic. Number 1, Legion. While Vanilla and Classic are certainly best representative of WoW as an MMO, Legion is the best video game overall in the World of Warcraft series. So the Legion expansion had class order halls, which expanded the lore of the game to be centered around the classes that you chose. Each distinctive class story had certain elements to it that were reflective of the specs that you were involved with. You had artifacts, weapons for each of those specs, so 2 to 4 depending on how many specs your class had, which all had some sort of storyline connection to them. Nothing beats a paladin wielding Ashbringer lore-wise. That is huge. And those stories kept moving forward in patches, which led to class-specific mounts and then class-specific challenges in the Mage Tower, which were just insane solo encounters that you had to either overgear or overskill, and they were really tough. There was also really high quality raid content in Legion, just like all of the most recent WoWs, and there was an optional in-game zone of Suramar, which was unique to World of Warcraft at that time, where you didn't necessarily have to go to Suramar. It was a max level only area where you could explore and you could do quests and you could unlock a big storyline zone and do solo scenario content. Every class and every spec was viable in this expansion. It introduced Demon Hunters, which is one of the coolest lore classes you can be. The only downside to this expansion was that it sort of retconned the Burning Crusade lore and reintroduced Illidan to a lot of fanfare, granted, but they kind of squandered that storyline. So ultimately, if you are looking to get an experience of what World of Warcraft is like as an MMO, as a best representation of the game, it's got to be vanilla, it's got to be classic. But the best video game experience that World of Warcraft has to offer was during the Legion expansion. The only expansion live now is, of course, Shadowlands, which is a quality expansion, and if you've never played WoW and you want a progressive storyline that has so much to do that you could play this game for the next couple years and still never see everything, that's a perfectly fine place to jump in and experience the content. Thanks everyone for sticking around with this rank video today. Everyone has their favorite expansion and it's all over the board. Nobody picks Warlords and Kata, let's be real. A lot of people will pick any of the first 3 trilogies, and I personally think Legion is the pinnacle. Please leave a like or subscribe down below so I know you like more content like this. Cheers all. Peace.